Professor Roberts, and thank you very much to you and to Professor Gracia Ferrer, Leo Ferrer, indeed, sorry, for having me. I'm very happy, and I am actually presenting from southern Taiwan, from Kaohsiung, where I am carrying out fieldwork at the moment. I think I have shared my screen, so I hope you can see it properly. So I would like to start my talk of today, entitled Women, Migrants, Emotions and Digital Entrepreneurship Between China and Taiwan, by asking you, what is this? Well, it looks quite self-evident, I guess. It's an orange bra, kind of an orange fluorescent bra, probably made of plastic and silicone, and for sure made in China. And this is actually the beginning of my talk, but also the ways my book, my monograph starts with. So the first time actually I saw this piece of lingerie was in 2015 in Taiwan. It was summertime. It was very, very hot, perhaps as hot as Tokyo in summer. And I was walking around the suburbs of Taipei, looking for a place to cool off. And actually everything was absolutely closed, no coffee shops, no bars, no supermarkets. And the only place I found was a lingerie shop. And so I decided to enter and to cool off, since it was too hot. So I entered this place, and I was very surprised because it was absolutely empty of clients. Perhaps business was going on pretty bad. There were absolutely no clients, and it was kind of a messed up place, you know. There were pieces of lingerie everywhere. There were underwear, bras, but there were also other products on the floor. I was really curious. There were boxes, you know, of infant formula. There were chicken feet, some spicy and dried meats. There were some, I don't know, face masks or some cosmetics. I was really surprised. So I was walking around this place, at least there was the AC, until I heard someone talking, even though I could not see anyone. And after a few seconds, I saw a woman approaching, and actually she was the owner of the shop. And she was not talking to me at all, but she was talking to her phone. She was recording some voice messages. And this woman was Fu Jin, so a Chinese migrant woman who lives in Taiwan, who lives in the suburbs of Taipei, and who is the owner of this lingerie shop. And as soon as she saw me, since the shop was empty and she was not quite busy, she started talking to me, and she explained to me that she came from China, and she was actually, developing her fantastic business within that place. And when I asked her why actually in their shop there were no clients, she told me that that was kind of normal because everything was being run online through the online application WeChat that you might not know in Japan because you might be using Facebook or Line, but which is a very common digital social media platform actually in China that Chinese people, both in China and abroad, do use for communication, sending pictures, sending vocal messages, as a matter of fact, sending images, emoticons, whatever thing you can imagine through an online application. And actually, it was very interesting to talk to Fu Jin, because she was explaining to me that, yes, her business was being run almost exclusively online, and all the products that she was selling, which went way beyond bras and underwear, as you understood, were being commercialized online, and were being commercialized online within groups of other Chinese migrants who, like Fu Jin, migrated and settled down in Taiwan. And actually her Chinese friends, or Chinese sisters, as she used to call them, became kind of her commercial partners and her clients. And it is actually from this little anecdotes that I would like to raise a couple of questions here today that we will try to answer together during this talk. So who is Fujin, with this Chinese migrant woman, and how did actually those commodities, which are very unusual to a certain extent and also very heterogeneous, arrive to Taiwan, and to what extent those commodities are related to Fujin's life, to Fujin's migratory pattern, and to Fujin, labor and migration experience broadly. And to what extent actually is entrepreneurship constituted, constructed, and performed online by Fujin and by some other Chinese migrant women living in Taiwan. And as soon as I talked to Fujin, actually, she explained to me that she was using, as I said, her Chinese fellow migrants as clients and as commercial partners, and that the products that she was commercializing were very unusual. However, they had a very strong emotional dimension to her. So another little point I would like to raise today and to ask today is, what is the role of emotion in shaping not only migration, but especially migrants' entrepreneurship and broadly economic activities and commerce? So in this talk, actually, I will go through a few points. First of all, I will very briefly review some literature and provide you with a theoretical frame of my research. Afterwards, I will try to position, Fujin, those Chinese migrant women, her sisters, her fellow migrants, within a broader, landscape of migration, and specifically marriage migration from China to Taiwan. Afterwards, I will present my data and my methods, and we will after go through my results. So who is Fujin? Who are Chinese migrant women in Taiwan? Actually, Fujin and her fellow migrants did migrate to Taiwan through marriage. Marriage is the necessary condition for Chinese migrant women to migrate and settle down in Taiwan. Marriage is the only legal condition for Chinese nationals to I would say, not only enter, but also settle down on the long term in Taiwan. As soon as we talk about marriage and migration, we are talking about a phenomenon which involves China and Taiwan, but also a phenomenon which is kind of global, because it involves many other women in many other countries, in North America, in Europe, in South America, probably in Africa, and certainly in Asia. What is marriage migration? Well, that is also quite self-evident from its name. It is a phenomenon which involves and links in a necessary way marriage and migration, where marriage is the necessary condition for migration. At the same time, as soon as we mention marriage and migration, we make reference to gender, because we are talking about women who migrate to different countries, and in this case, Taiwan, but that could be Singapore, that could be Japan, that could be Korea, that could be Hong Kong, that could be other East Asian and Southeast Asian countries, right? We're talking about women whose migration is inscribed within restrictive and almost gendered migratory policies. For a very long time, in the East Asian context, in the Southeast Asian context, and specifically in Taiwan, marriage migration has been a commercially arranged phenomenon, in many cases mediated by agencies or brokers who acted actually as intermediaries or facilitators actually of cross-border and transnational encounters between men and women, and in this specific case between Taiwanese men and Chinese women. You may also consider the fact that as soon as marriage migration involves gender and involves women, since it is a very gendered phenomena, we do have kind of a necessary, I would say, connection with the familiar and with the domestic sphere of life and of experience of those women who leave their country of origin to settle down more or less temporarily for more or less the long term to live with their husband within their family and broadly the domestic sphere. And we also know that literature, in most cases, when analyzing the link between gender and migration in terms of marriage migration, has very much focused on women's role within the familiar sphere, within the domestic sphere, at home mostly, where women are supposed as kind of a duty to perform what has been called reproductive labor and reproductive labor, which is as a matter of fact, a matter of, well, having children in the society of arrival and taking care also of the elderly, of the family of their husbands. At the very same time, literature, although focusing on this gendered performance of familiar and domestic roles in the society of arrival by marriage migrants, by women, has also been focusing a little bit on marriage migrants' capacity of action in terms of agency. As soon as their migration, their biographical experiences and their daily life are inscribed within restrictive migratory regimes and with a very strict and rigid role performance in the society of arrival, migrants are still provided with social, economic, and cultural resources and a certain amount of competences to act and react to situation of inequality and discrimination. And actually, more specifically and reflective on agency and migrants' capacity of action, in international scholarship, I would say, and we cannot limit that to East Asia or to Taiwan, even less, has been looking at the link between migration and inequality which does not only concern the domestic and the familiar sphere, but specific the economic dimension of inequality, as soon as discrimination and vulnerability involve migrants' access, integration, and permanence to a certain extent in the labor market of the society of arrival. We saw that we know that scholarship has pointed out that migrants are in many cases vulnerable economic actors who do have to cope with obstacles in terms of access to employment, difficulties in terms of permanence in the labor market, and also situations of inequality, discrimination, and precarity within different segments of the labor market. And we also do know that scholarship has identified self-employment and mostly independent work and entrepreneurship as effective tools that migrants can put into practice to cope with inequality, specifically in the labor market. However, as I mentioned to you before, when reflecting on the case of Zani and of our digital entrepreneurship in Taiwan, beyond entrepreneurship itself, it is very interesting to highlight the fact that very recent trends in migration studies specifically have been focusing on the digital age of migration. And this is a very important, actually, theoretical framework I do inscribe my research in. As you can imagine, when I talked about Zani and I mentioned the use of WeChat as a social media platform for communication, for sociality, and indeed for economic action and entrepreneurship, I have been very much concerned with the study of migrants' use of social media platforms and online applications for multiple purposes. And actually, scholarship, especially in Europe, but also in Asia and in East Asia specifically, has been studying the ways migrants as actors do make good use of online applications for multiple purposes. Multiple purposes do include what? Include communication and sociality, include keeping in touch and maintaining local and transnational bonds with family members, with friends, and with diasporic groups located both in migrant society of arrival and of departure indeed, but also the performance actually of digital tools and online applications for commerce and business. Commerce and business, which in contexts where access to the local labor market can be obstructed, might become interesting and almost creative spaces to negotiate employment and to find a job for migrants. Another very recent, actually, plethora of works in migration studies, but also in economic sociology, involve the study of emotion. On their side, migration studies have been focusing on the link between migration and emotion by showing how migration is an emotional experience. Migration is an emotionally constructed experience, but also migration is an experience which generates multiple emotions by those who perform it. At the very same time, in the field of economic sociology, scholars have been focusing on the link between emotion and economic action, and they have trying to explain the extent to which commerce, business, but also production and consumption processes are emotional processes which are constructed by and by turn develop different and kind of heterogeneous emotions. So in this talk, actually, in a very perhaps ambitious and almost confusing way, but I think I might be able to succeed. This is my challenge. I try to bring all of these fields and subfields together. So on the one hand, a conceptualization related to migrant entrepreneurship and economic inequality, a novel conceptualization related to migrants' use of digital platforms and information and communication technologies, but also recent conceptualizations related to the link between emotion and migration and emotion and economic action. And actually my goal is to bring all of these fields and subfields together to apprehend Chinese migrants women digital entrepreneurship in Taiwan, which, as I will try to show, turns to be a transnational entrepreneurship as much as an emotional entrepreneurship. To do so, I draw actually on ethnographic work I carried out in China and in Taiwan between 2016 and 2018, when I was a doctoral student, and where I could, both in China and in Taiwan, carry out 17 months of multi-sited ethnography in southern China, in Guangdong province, in Zhejiang province, and in Anhui province, as well as in Taiwan. Those sites, the sites I have been chosen for my ethnography, do actually correspond to the sites invested by women's migration. We are talking about Chinese women who go through a three-step migration. They are mostly from rural origin. They come from Anhui, from Hunan, from Henan, from Jiangxi, from Sichuan provinces in internal China. And at the age of 14, 15, 16 years old, those women do migrate to southern Chinese cities in the provinces of Guangdong, of Zhejiang, of Fujian, where they do work in the local factories. And it is actually after this first rural to urban internal migration in China that Chinese migrant women will re-migrate to Taiwan through marriage. And they will have the chance, as I've showed in my research, and I will not have time to develop today, to get in touch, to get to know their future Taiwanese husbands, not through commercially arranged practices, agencies, or brokers, but actually within the southern Chinese cities they work in, and within the factories they are employed in as migrant workers in China, factories which are in many cases owned by Taiwanese foreign businessmen, Taiwanese overseas managers who are located in southern China. So I could meet women both in China and in Taiwan, both in the rural areas they come from, in the cities they do work in China, and in the Taiwanese cities they do re-migrate to in Taiwan after marriage. And I could carry out kind of 140 biographical interviews with women who were pretty young. They were between 18 and 36 years old. And I actually used many strategies to identify my informants. In Taiwan, at the very beginning, after meeting Fujin in their lingerie shop, I had been teaching English for kind of 7 or 8 months in the same second floor of the lingerie shop to Fujin and their friends. I have been identifying women through snowballing methods, through ties of friendship and of closeness. I have been attending some ethnic minority dance classes in Taiwan. I have been attending beauty classes organized for foreign migrants in Taiwan by the Taiwanese government. I have been helping women in the street markets. They were selling food and vegetables in. I have been helping women to develop their entrepreneurial activities in Taiwan, and I could identify kind of a few informants. And I could have the chance, especially, to meet my informants in Taiwan and to refollow them back to China when they were going back to visit their families during the Chinese New Year. And I also had the chance to work as a quality manager in a few Taiwanese factories in southern China, where I could meet and interview some Chinese working women in situ. And something interesting is that beyond this physical ethnographic method, I have also been carrying out a sort of virtual ethnography within the WeChat group for sociality and for business of Chinese migrant women in Taiwan. So I was invited, actually, sometimes I even asked by my informants to join some WeChat groups, which were composed of between actually 19 and 499 women. So quite of a few big groups, and I could actually spend time and carry out online virtual observations and conversations inside 12 groups of WeChat. And I could have the chance not only to socialize and to look at the daily conversations of women, but also to observe the ways that they were actually developing their commerce and business online. So this being said, I think I can start presenting my result. So you might have understood this in the frame of this restrictive marriage migratory regime. Chinese migrant women through marriage migrate to Taiwan. As soon as they arrive in Taiwan, as I said before, they are required to perform gender role at homes. They are wives, they are mothers, and they are mothers-in-law. And in many cases, they find themselves kind of stuck at home within the domestic sphere. They cannot go out. They do not have friends. They are supposed to stay at home and cook dinner for their husband. They are supposed to take care of their children, indeed, but in many cases, they also do live actually with the family of their husband, and they are supposed to take care of their parents-in-law, with whom the relationship in many cases are a bit conflictual, or at least not very friendly. As a matter of fact, those women, as soon as they arrive in Taiwan, find themselves very lonely, very depressed. Most of them told me that as soon as they arrived, they were bored, they were frustrated, they were homesick, they were absolutely disillusioned. They aspired to modernity, to consumerism, to upward social mobility through marriage migration when leaving China and were leaving the factories they were working in. And they ended up performing reproductive labor, lonely and abandoned in Taiwan. Very interesting as soon as they go out of their lodgings, of their places, and look for jobs in the labor market, they also do face a few obstacles and at least a few difficulties. Why? Well, first of all, because of the political standoff between China and Taiwan, Chinese nationals and Chinese women specifically do face situations of social contempt and cultural discrimination because of their Chinese origin. At the same time, we're talking about women who are lowly qualified, who are provided with poor educational skills and professional credentials. They come from the countryside, they did not go to school, and their previous professional and economic experiences are limited to industrial work and to factory work in China. And so for them, actually finding a decent and well-paid job in Taiwan is not very easy. As soon as they can find a job, they end up working in the informal sector. They work in the field of catering, they work in little restaurants, in the canteens, they sell vegetables at the markets, they work in beauty centers, they work in this sort of nail polish, salons that is not very, I would say, rewarding for them, and nor provide them with very high salaries. So imagine Chinese women depressed, frustrated, disappointment because of Taiwan, disappointment because of a post-migration situation they did not expect at all, sick and homesick, sick of their families, sick of their husbands, sick of this situation and of sick. They miss China and they miss their friends, they miss their family there. Disillusioned because they cannot find a job, and especially stuck at home. What do they do? What do you do when you are stuck at home and you are bored? What do we do here? What do we do here in Japan? What do we do here in Taiwan? What do we do in Europe and in North America? Well, we do open our smartphones and we do open Facebook, we do open Line, we post pictures, we get in touch with friends. This is very common, right? We go on Tinder. Well, this is also what Chinese women do. I mean, they do not go on Tinder, but they do open their WeChat. They open their WeChat, they open this online application, they check their friends' profiles, they check the walls of their friends, they check the pictures of their family members, of their relatives, and they try to virtually get in touch with people, not to be bored and to overstep to a certain extent sadness and homesickness. A very interesting actually mechanism of WeChat is related to the possibility, a little bit like Tinder, I would say, to identify users nearby. So actually I can take my phone and I can drift the bottle, as we say, and identify the people who are also drifting the bottle nearby and see their distance in kilometers. But I can also shake my phone and see who near me, who nearby is also shaking the phone. And as soon as I shake my phone and identify close by users, I can easily text them. And so imagine Chinese women, they are at home and they can shake their phone and see who is also shaking a phone nearby, and they start sending messages. And you might have understood this. In Taiwan, nobody uses WeChat. The only WeChat users are Chinese migrants. So Chinese women, as soon as they do perform those functions on WeChat, are kind of sure that they will identify Chinese nationals, some other Chinese women, fellow migrants who, like them, are bored and sad in Taiwan. And as simple as it seems, they start chatting, they start developing face-to-face, like two people conversations, but they can also join groups which are composed of many other women. They have the chance to, talk about their daily life, share pictures of their children, compare about their husbands and parents-in-law, but also seek advice, ask for information about where to buy Chinese products, about the Taiwanese schooling system for the children, where to get a lawyer if they want to divorce. This is very common, actually, pieces of conversation that we can see online. We can see online developed by those Chinese migrant women who do share similar migratory and familiar experiences, who do share gender indeed, and who do share actually similar emotional experiences of depression, frustration, sadness, and regret for migration. As I said, online, by talking together, by sharing information, by sharing advice, by sharing pieces of everyday life, those women gather together within online emotional communities performed through this social media platform, which is WeChat. A very interesting point of WeChat is that beyond its potential for communication and sociality, as you might have understood it, it also enables its users to develop to a certain extent economic and financial transactions. WeChat does not only enable you to identify users nearby, but it also enables users to send money through what is called the Hongbao, the rent envelope mechanism. So basically, I can very easily send money through WeChat to people who are located in the same country as I am, but also in different countries. And it is very interesting because I can actually use as a Chinese woman in Taiwan, I can still use my Chinese bank account, which is linked to my WeChat Chinese application to transfer money. Actually, this potential for transfer money and online financial transaction of WeChat makes it a very good commercial and business infrastructure, which potentially enables its users to develop online commerce and digital trade, as it is the case of Fujin. But beyond Fujin, this is also the case of another informant and almost friend of mine, who is Ai Hua, who is also a Chinese migrant woman. And I'm happy to share a story with you so that you can you can better understand actually the way this sort of digital commerce is arranged and performed. So Ai Hua is 33 years old and she comes from rural Hunan in China. When she came from a very poor family, actually, she did not go to school. She had quite a few brothers and sisters, and none of them went to school because of her family economic situation. And they all, left the countryside and migrated to big Chinese coastal cities such as Shenzhen, Dongguan, and Canton to work in the local factories. And so did Ai Hua. So Ai Hua, when she was 15 years old, left her rural countryside and she migrated to Shenzhen to work in local textile and electronic factories. And Ai Hua told me that when she was a child, she had 3 wishes. The day she left the rural countryside, she had 3 wishes. She wanted to buy a fancy bag, she wanted to buy a laptop, and she wanted to buy a smartphone. However, as soon as she arrived in Shenzhen, she came to terms pretty quickly with the fact that she would not be able to fulfill her wishes and her dreams, actually. Why? Because she was working in electronic and textile factories. She was very badly paid. She was living with many other Chinese rural proletarians in this sort of, big dorms. She was working all the times, and even though she eventually might have earned the money she needed to buy the fancy bag, the smartphone, and the laptop, she did not even have time to go out shopping because she was working all the time. After a few years of industrial work, Ai Hua was more and more frustrated and more unhappy. She told me that she did not want to, when she was a teenager, when she was 19, 20 years old, she did not want to be a proletarian. She did not want to be a factory girl anymore. She did not want to sell her labor to anyone else. She wanted to become a boss, a Lao Ban Niang. She wanted to be the employer of herself and to earn her own money and to develop her own business. But in China, that was not quite possible. She was a rural migrant. She did not have access to qualified segments of the labor market. Rural to urban migratory regimes in China are also very restrictive for the rural population. I don't have time to develop here. And very quickly, Ai Hua came to terms with the fact that China was not the right place to become an entrepreneur, to become a boss. Actually, very interesting. In the last factory she had been employed in, Ai Hua met the man who became her future husband. He was a Taiwanese manager at Taishan, a Taiwanese overseas businessman who was actually working in this textile factory. Ai Hua and her husband met in China, and actually after a short, sorry, I think I have a problem with my PowerPoint. What happened to my PowerPoint? Can you still see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Right. So actually, in the southern Chinese factory, she met this Taiwanese businessman. They got married, and later on they migrated to Taiwan. They migrated to Taiwan because Ai Hua was pregnant and she was going to give birth in Taiwan. However, since her husband was still working in China, Ai Hua migrated to Taiwan first. She gave birth, and then she re-migrated back to China to live with her husband for a few months. And as soon as she was back to China, Ai Hua was not working anymore. She was taking care of her child, and she kind of quickly faced a problem in China. She was with her child. She wanted to breastfeed, but she had no milk. She could not breastfeed. And Ai Hua told me that was a very painful experience for her. And she really wanted to provide her child with some good quality infant formula. However, the infant formula in China was of a very bad quality. So by that time, Ai Hua was living in China. Her husband was living and working in China too, but her husband, since he was a businessman, had very frequent trips between China and Taiwan. And he was actually often flying and traveling to Taipei for business purposes. So every time her husband was going to Taiwan, Ai Hua was asking him to bring a little bit of Taiwanese, good quality infant formula back to China, where the quality of infant formula is very bad. Let's think about the scandals of 2008 and 2009, when many infants actually died because of this poisonous milk powder. And Ai Hua actually started using that infant formula for herself, but she also started, selling it or offering it to her friends who were living in Shenzhen. After a few months, Ai Hua moved back to Taiwan. She settled down, and as many other women, she was unhappy. She was frustrated. She was depressed. She was sad. She was living with her parents-in-law. She wanted to work. She wanted to become independent. She wanted to become autonomous. She wanted to negotiate her own job and her own salary, but that was not quite possible in Taiwan. As soon as she could negotiate the possibility to go working with her parents-in-law and with her husband, she was facing situations of discrimination and inequality in the labor market. She worked as a waitress. She worked as a care worker. She also sold some vegetables at the market, but that was not what Ai Hua aspired to. Ai Hua wanted to become a boss. Ai Hua wanted to become Ai Hua wanted to become an entrepreneur, and Ai Hua wanted to become the owner of her own business. And that's what she did. One day, actually, she remembered that little business of infant formula that she could start actually in China. And she thought actually about doing the same in Taiwan. She thought that she could get in touch with her Chinese fellow migrants in China and ask them whether they wanted to purchase actually some Taiwanese good quality infant formula. And after a while, actually, she could develop quite of a good clientele while living in Taiwan. She could mobilize her social networks in China to start this infant formula business in Taiwan. As interesting as it is, actually, Ai Hua started her business mostly online because her clients were located in China, and she could make good use of the online application WeChat actually to transfer money, to get the money from her clients in China, and to develop her business. After her market actually expanded while commercializing infant formula between China and Taiwan, Ai Hua also decided actually to push her business further, as for example Fujin also did. And she started making good use not only of her social networks located in China, but also of her social networks of Chinese migrant women located in Taiwan to do this sort of cross-border import and export activity. So she was not only actually selling Taiwanese products, milk powder specifically, from Taiwan to China, but she was also starting to import some products from China to Taiwan, inquiring amongst her Chinese fellow migrants about the products they might have been interested in buying when being in Taiwan. So let me take a look to the commodities Ai Hua, but also Chinese migrant women do mostly commercialize in Taiwan. So beyond infant formula and beyond the orange bras and underwear, we do also find spicy meat, chicken feet, cosmetics, medicines, facial masks, most of the products that I could see on Fujin's inside Fujin's shop and on the floor actually of her shop. It is very interesting to see that those products, chicken feet, dried meats, cosmetics, or infant formula, are not only unusual, but also kind of low value and kind of inexpensive products. This is not especially what I would consider myself training between China and Taiwan. Those are not the commodities I would imagine, commercializing when developing transnational business, right? However, as Ai Hua, but also Fujin and some other informants explained to me, those products are not necessarily of a very high value, but they have a very strong emotional dimension. Why? Because when we look at those products, we do understand very quickly that those products have a very strong emotional significance for women. Products vehiculate emotions, products and commodities produce emotions, and the processes of commodification and also selling and buying are constructed by emotions. Emotions of nostalgia, emotions of homesickness, as soon as Chinese women living in Taiwan can enjoy some traditional chicken feet and spicy meats imported from their rural communities of origin in China, but also emotions of determination and of ambition as soon as they are able to commercialize modern and urban almost products such as cosmetics, infant formula, and medicines from Taiwan to China, and emotions of care and of concern for the elderly and for their relatives when commercializing infant formula or medicines from Taiwan to China, especially to those women have left behind. I think of their parents getting old in the countryside, or their friends requiring good quality, medicines or infant formula and still being located in China. Another interesting point when we look at those commodities is not only their emotional, but also their contested and transgressed dimension. Actually, when we look at infant formula, when we look at meat, when we look at medicines, when we look at cosmetics, we are talking about commodities which do not freely and smoothly, I would say, circulate between China and Taiwan. Those products, those goods are subjected to import and export restrictions and even bans between two countries. And they are indeed subjected to strong controls and checks when they cross through highly monitored and highly surveilled, sovereign borders, both China and Taiwan, indeed. However, as interesting as it seems, as soon as this business is mostly developed online and transactions are digitally developed through the online application WeChat, the transactions and those buying and selling processes and the transactions, the financial transactions which derive from that remain invisible to the eyes of the administrations, of the local Taiwanese administrations, and I would say that the ways that those commodities circulate between China and Taiwan are certainly contested and transgressed, but they remain invisible and tax-free because, as you understood this, transactions and payments are carried out online. So we do see that WeChat is not only an infrastructure for business, it is not only an infrastructure to develop business, digital business, it is also an infrastructure to mobilize social networks within the different spaces of women's migration in China and in Taiwan, but it is also an infrastructure which supports the making of invisible and almost transgressive economic activities as soon as those remain invisible or I would say hidden at least. So let me try to conclude, because I think that my time has come, by trying to theorize or to conceptualize a little bit this emotional and digital migrant entrepreneurship developed by women between China and Taiwan. So women's emotional and digital entrepreneurship is developed in a context of migration, inequality, and digital connectivity, which do mutually construct each other. This emotional digital entrepreneurship is constructed at the crossroad between women's migratory biographies and the commercial geographies of the objects that they do commercialize along the temporalities and across the spaces of their migration, both from the countryside to the city in China, from the Chinese city to Taiwan later. It is a made in little, small scaled, however, transnational entrepreneurship where a multiplicity of actors and social networks located both in the Chinese rural communities of origin of women, in the cities women have been working in China and in Taiwan, do cooperate to develop this transnational digital entrepreneurship. It is an entrepreneurship supported by emotions and affections, which do not only fuel consumption and commercialization processes, but which do also enable women to identify commercial partners and clients. And it is indeed, it is made in little, contested, transgressed emotional entrepreneurship, which is based upon the contestation of commercial rules, the transgression of import and export restrictions, and the transgression of borders. It is an emotional digital transnational entrepreneurship which to a certain extent emerges in the margins of an economic globalization, which is constructed and performed by the daily actors of migration, and in this case, Chinese marriage migrants in Taiwan. I think that my time has come. I do not quite know what has happened with my PPT, but I think I will stop here.